So while the Treasury Secretary was in China working on that relationship, the Republicans in the U.S. were busy trying to do their own makeover. And I thought it was fascinating because they put out a report, it's kind of their own appraisal of why we lost the 2012 presidential election and didn't do so hot in congressional elections either. And they were way harder on themselves than even Democrats had been or than neutral observers had been.
Or even the press.
Or even the press. It was pretty scathing.
I mean, Reince Priebus, the head of the Republican Party, comes out and he says no party's ever done anything like this, and that was true on his face. I mean, the things that they said about themselves were extraordinary. We're caught in a cul-de-sac. We're the party that young people and other voters roll their eyes at. We're the party that we saw in our own focus groups is seen as the party of grumpy old men, that people are scared of it, etc. They laid out an interesting dichotomy. It was right at the outset. They said there are two Republican parties. There's the gubernatorial Republican Party, represented by the 30 governors in the 30 states, and then there's the federal wing of the Republican Party, by which they mainly meant the presidential campaign. Yeah. But the odd thing about that is all the language then was really talking about the federal wing as in Congress. So much of the kind of body language things that they wanted people to change were really there. While, I mean, obviously the presidential campaign doesn't exist anymore, but if you search through, there was almost no mentions of Congress itself. It's interesting because the whole dichotomy really was about, is it the product or the packaging? And so much of the emphasis was on the packaging. We need to change the packaging.
Although the Congress is where the Tea Party pressures that push the party to the right are the most acute, because governors who have to run states are kind of more inclined to move toward the middle, and presidential candidates, as you saw with Mitt Romney, are kind of trying to stay away from the Tea Party traps. But in Congress, particularly in the House, there's no avoiding it.
Yeah, not only that, but there's also been a lot of rejection. Like now, a lot of the people that are looking to run for the Senate, the Republican Party, particularly in Washington, is so much about its primary setting, like who they're going to face in a primary. So there was a lot of people saying, for one, we're kind of tired. Mitch McConnell has been saying this whole beating ourselves up. We just need to unify and move on. And then there are a lot of others. There were two areas that they moved into policy. One was we need to move forward on comprehensive immigration reform, and we need to be way more tolerant on the social issues front. And for a lot of people, it was like, whoa, I don't think we're ready to go there as a party, particularly in the House, Republican setting, where neither of those two things, if you become a lot more accommodationist, is necessarily going to be good for those.
What about the Republican senators? There's some moderate Republican senators who seem to be pretty active at the moment.
Well, it's not just moderate. They actually realize that the party is paying a price for seeming to be ineffective, and not just obstructionist, but ineffective. And if you want to go to the voters and say, we're helping solve problems, you have to have actually helped solve some problems. And in the Senate, in particular, you're right. There are people who are really frustrated by that because they want to make something. Rob Portman from Ohio, for example, is a good example. I think one of the problems that they've got, though, is that they need to find allies in the House Republican caucus, and that's going to be hard to do, because if you're willing to compromise in the Senate because your election's 4 or even 6 years off, that's not true for any Republican in the House. It also, by the way, isn't true for Mitch McConnell, who's the Republican leader in the Senate, who's up for election next year and who's worried about a challenge from the right.
Yeah, there's a whole host of the senators, Republican senators, that are not looking over their left shoulder, but over their right shoulder, who are up for election next year. And Mitch McConnell in Kentucky is one of them. Lindsey Graham in South Carolina. There's a lot of that, and it's sort of a purifying force on the right.
Meantime, though, the Republicans are actually winning some of these budget battles, and they're not taking enough credit, in my view, for that. They basically have preserved a lot of the Bush tax cuts at the end of the year in the fiscal cliff deal, and they've now shifted the conversation away from taxes to spending, and that's what they want to talk about.
I think that there's a remarkable inability of the House Republicans to ever declare victory.
Right.
As you pointed out to me the other day, they got 98% of the Bush tax cuts extended permanently, and the Democrats have completely rolled over on the sequester. They're now just fudging around the edges. They are passing legislation that will reduce annually appropriated spending to the levels of the sequester for the rest of this fiscal year.